So here's my not so hot take for the day. I think you should trust your gut when you read the Bible. See, what can sometimes happen is that if we are reading our Bible, at least if we are taking it seriously and studying it, and we will come across a passage that seems very violent or even oppressive. And by the way, there is no point denying that those passages are in our Bibles. They are, and we have to deal with them. But what can happen is that it feels very disconnected from the way of Jesus that drew us in and that we want to follow in our lives. In fact, I've described it this way in my last book, that my conscience actually rebels when I'm told that the nonviolent Jesus, who would endure death on a cross, will one day return wielding a giant claymore against his enemies. By the way, that is not what is going on in Revelation. Check out Upside Down Apocalypse if you're interested in more of that. But when I've said that, I've then been told, well, it doesn't matter. You can't have confidence in your feelings. You can't trust your conscience. It isn't trustworthy. You just have to accept it as it's written. I wonder, though, if that is really indicative of what Jesus sees in us and how Jesus expects us to approach both our experience of the world, but also how we read the Bible. And of course, I'm going to suggest no. See, there's this passage in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is starting to wrap up his first sermon, and he turns his attention to the generosity of God. But he does this really interesting thing where he uses our goodness, our generosity, as a launching point to then explain God's. He says this, "Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or which of you, if your son asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, even though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, then how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to all those who ask?" Now, granted, this is sort of an awkward moment here, since Jesus flat out just told us we're all evil, soup's aggressed, I get it. But look at the thrust of what he's actually saying. This "how much more than" structure was a common rhetorical strategy in Jesus' day. It was employed by both Greek and Jewish teachers of the time, but the basic strategy here was to establish a commonality, something that we can all agree on, so that then you could appeal to a larger truth built on that foundational premise. And here, the commonality that Jesus starts with is, you know what good gifts are, because you know what love looks like, because you are obviously good and loving to those you care about. Now, the larger truth on the other side of that, the one that Jesus wants to get to, is that God is that same goodness in us, albeit completely unhindered, entirely pure. In fact, in the parallel that he set up here, we would probably expect Jesus to say something like, if you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will God give good gifts to God's children? Except that Jesus wants to expand our imagination of the divine even farther, and so he actually ends with this phrase, talking about God's good gifts to all those who ask. So not only is God more generous than we are with our kids, God is more generous to anyone who comes in need. Still, the point being that even in our brokenness, even though we are evil, as Jesus says, we still know good when we see it. We can, and we do, demonstrate love in our lives, and not only that, our love can be a model to understand the unbounded love of God. If you are, by any stretch, able to consider yourself a good parent, like not a perfect parent, not even a parent who can make it throughout the day without at least a few mistakes, just a run-of-the-mill, good, caring, loving parent who looks after your kids. If you don't have kids, then just a good friend to those around you, then you are yourself a window into the heart of God for you. You are teaching yourself about the divine every single day when you care for those around you. And often, I actually find myself coming back to this passage to remind myself that God is at least as good a parent as I am. And I know what I would do for my kids. I make mistakes all the time. I have to ask for forgiveness, but I know how I love my kids. And if God is at least that good, it makes me feel pretty safe in God's arms. But here's his starting point. Jesus thinks that you and I, we are capable of naming what is good and right and true and just in the world. And Jesus thinks that even that flawed perspective that we carry, that can lead us back to God. So yeah, when something doesn't feel like Jesus, or when something doesn't seem loving, even when I'm reading my Bible, I take that seriously. Like, not as gospel, not as hard gospel, because I know I can be wrong, and I am a lot, and I know I need to learn in community and bring my readings to those around me who care about me and help me understand the scriptures. But I absolutely have learned to take my sense of what is good in the world as a valuable part of my dialogue with God and with the Bible, and I think you should as well. Hey, thanks for making it through to the end of that. If you're interested in what we're doing here at Commons, then give us a subscribe, a like, all of that stuff. And by all means, post a comment and we'll continue the discussion there. You can also join our Discord for the ongoing dialogue here in our community. Anyway, have a great week. We'll see you soon.